collaborazione col dottorato internazionale in filosofia Lecce Parigi Colonia e il corso di laurea in filosofia dell'Università del Salento. Poiché l'ospite di questa sera parlerà in inglese, mi prendo la libertà di introdurlo ricorrendo alla lingua della sua comunicazione. It's with the greatest pleasure that I introduce today Professor Thomas Fuchs. Thomas Fuchs teaches at Heidelberg University, where he's the Karl Jaspers Professor of Philosophy and Psychiatry. And he is one of the most relevant figures in the international scholarship in the domain of phenomenological psychopathology and cognitive neuroscience. His researches focus on the crucial topics of embodiment, temporality, intersubjectivity, and holism. He has more than 300 articles as well as a large number of influent books. Among them, I have to mention at least his recent Ecology of the Brain, The Phenomenology and Biology of the Embodied Mind, published in 2018 for Oxford University Press. Here he develops, from an integrated philosophical and psychopathological point of view, an ecological and embodied concept of brain as a mediating or resonance organ. Thomas Fuchs is coordinator of several international research projects, among which the European Marie Curie Research Training Network DISCOS and the joint national research project, The Brain as an Organ of Interrelations. But Thomas Fuchs, and this is one of the reasons of his presence here today, is also the author of a very important book on Descartes, The Mechanization of the Heart, Harvey and Descartes, published in 2001 for University of Rochester Press. We are just delighted and honored to have him here with us today, and I want to thank him so much for his participation. So just let me know, let me give him the floor for his conference entitled Transhumanism and Embodiment on the Prospects for Enhancement of Humans. You are very welcome, Professor Fuchs, and thank you to be here with us.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and of course for the invitation to this seminar series, which I'm proud to be part of. Let me just make sure that I'm well understood, and I don't see my face. Is it visible? Is it okay?
Yes.
All fine? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, then I can go on. If there's anything wrong with the transmission, then just interrupt me, please. Okay. I start with a quotation of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground. We are oppressed at being men, men with a real individual body and blood. We are ashamed of it. We think it a disgrace and try to contrive to be some sort of impossible generalized man. Soon we shall contrive to be born somehow from an idea. Now, this quotation from Dostoevsky seems prophetic. Being an ordinary person made of flesh and blood becomes more and more a defect. In the face of our machines, we begin to be ashamed of our own imperfection. And this seems to announce a fundamental transformation of the previous image of the human, which we may characterize by the following features. Evolution is understood as a process of progressive differentiation and optimization of life. Its outcome is, however, contingent on each point in time. No one wanted us this way. So human nature can no longer be considered as a set constant. Second, man in his past state and in his present state of development is seen as fundamentally incomplete. The outcome of evolution is only a badly constructed, fallible product, growing blindly. Therefore, human nature is changeable, and it is also in every sense in need of enhancement. We should assume the responsibility for our further development ourselves. And above all, our bodies are fragile, vulnerable. subjugated by age and frail. Mortality is the greatest imposition that nature has in store for us, and dependence on bodily preconditions appears to be ever less acceptable. Overcoming it becomes the consummation, the highest goal of human emancipatory projects. So what is propagated are various forms of optimization and upgrading of the body, technological remodeling of human nature, and even the overcoming of death. For the last 2 or 3 decades, such ideas have found increasing prevalence under the term transhumanism. Transhumanists see the opportunity to optimize inadequate human nature by bio, nano, and computer technologies. Each person should have the right to define and expand his psychic or physical capacities, his sex, his appearance, or his intelligence, according to his will. Cyborgs should or could form the next stage of evolution and lead us to summits of intelligence and life expectancy, which are unimaginable today. Such utopic ideas find philosophical support in functionalist theories, according to which the human mind ultimately exists as an informational and data structure. Information is, however, in principle transferable and is not bound to a particular corporeal basis. Information not uses only the brain as a substrate, but also external prostheses, memory storages, or computer systems. Humans are therefore, in the words of philosopher Andy Clark, natural-born cyborgs. And there is nothing contradictory in the mixture of technology, brain, and body, because the mind itself is already thought of as an analogy of a technical system. Various pharmacological, genetic, or digital techniques of enhancement may make us or our descendants post-human beings who may have indefinite health spans, much greater intellectual faculties than any current human being, and perhaps entirely new sensibilities or modalities, as well as the ability to control their own emotions. This is a quote from Nick Bostrom, one of the leading transhumanists resident in Oxford. Now, such promises extend to the idea of transferring one's mind to other substrates in the form of pure information, the so-called mind uploading. We can connect our brain to a computer, do away with our old body, composed of skin and bone, and finally attain digital immortality. Up until now, this is a quote from Ray Kurzweil, one of the leading transhumanists and now leader of Google technology development. Up until now, our mortality was tied to the longevity of our hardware. When the hardware crashed, that was it. Now, as we cross the divide to instantiate ourselves into our computational technology, our identity will be based on our evolving mind file. We will be software, not hardware. And in this way, transhumanism radicalizes a view of the human body that is widespread in both the life sciences and the humanities. It is the conception of the body as a vehicle or apparatus, external to ourselves, subject to our free disposal and manipulation. And this mechanistic view of the body is the counterpart to the functionalist view of the mind as pure information or software. Transhumanism is thus based on a radical dualism of body and mind. But what it wholly misses is a fundamental structure of human existence, namely vitality and embodiment. Humans, so I will argue in the following, are neither biological machines nor pure minds, but they are first and foremost living bodily beings, Being bodily is not something external to us, but is rather the foundation of our existence. Precisely because all feeling, perception, thought, and action is a form of our embodied way of life. At the same time, of course, humans are beings with the ability to take stance towards their corporeality, that is, to form an instrumental relationship with their body. But they can neither ignore their corporeality, nor just do away with it. A comprehensive defense of human embodied nature certainly demands a far more extensive discussion than is possible for me in this context. I will therefore single out only the most prominent most prominent vision of human optimization, namely mind uploading or digital immortality. This vision is particularly suitable for illustrating and refuting the neo-Gnostic image of humanity, which is found in trans and posthumanism. This vision is and from there, a light will also be shed on the less revolutionary variants of human enhancement, which only aim at limited transformation of human nature, but which are equally based on a dualism of mind and body. So I start with a critique of mind uploading, namely on the two aspects, functionalism and neuroreductionism. Now, what is mind uploading? In short, it means detaching consciousness from the biological organism and transferring it to a digital system. The basic idea, so quote from Sandberg and Bostrom, the basic idea is to take a particular brain, scan its structure in detail, and construct a software model of it that is so faithful to its original that when run on appropriate hardware, it will behave in essentially the same way as the original brain. And if successful, the procedure would lead to a qualitative reproduction of the original mind with memory and personality intact onto a computer where it would now exist as software. This digital intelligence would then occupy a cyborg or an android, or would live in virtual reality, becoming in principle immortal. In support of this, transhumanists usually point to the possibility of connecting the brain to microchips, and the signals of which feed into the neural network. And this would not only support our abilities to an unprecedented scale, but also gradually outsource consciousness to external structures. Of course, all of this is far from realization, and it is indeed highly questionable whether connecting the brain to an electronic data storage is even possible. Brain-computer faces at present work solely through very global recording of brain activity through EEG or electrodes in the skull. The signal patterns are processed by computers and enable the subjects to direct a cursor on a screen or to operate a robot arm by means of mere imagination of movement. However, the reverse direction, the introduction of specific signal patterns into the brain, is so far completely impossible. And so we will continue to acquire foreign languages only through learning and practice, and not through ordering a program from Amazon and downloading it onto our brain. Now, it is adventurous enough to meditate on the thought that we could scan or copy the structure of the brain with its over 100 billion neurons and multiple hundreds of trillions of synapses. The thought becomes fantastic, however, if one considers that indeed we need to capture not only the structure, but also the entire continuously variable activity of the system as a whole, right up to the transmitter release in individual synapses. And here it is hard to say what could be scanned. One could as well try to copy a waterfall. But let us leave such objection aside and devote ourselves to the foundational idea of mind uploading. Obviously, we are dealing here with a peculiar amalgam of materialism and idealism. On the one hand, consciousness is reduced to the neural processes of the brain and thereby materialized. On the other hand, it is considered as the pure form of this process, namely as the pattern of information, which can in principle be completely detached from the substrate and transferred to other carrier systems. And this functionalism is nothing other than an idealism of information. However, both assumptions, the materialistic and the idealistic, are equally blind to the living reality of the embodied person. And in the following, I criticize first the functionalist and then the neuroreductionist prerequisite of a transfer of consciousness, of mind uploading. The idea of mind uploading equates the mind with a totality of algorithmic processes in a complex system such as the brain. In other words, with software. And this corresponds to the common concept of cognitive science as well as artificial intelligence, namely functionalism. And here, mental states, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, wishes are defined through functional connections of input and output of a system. So someone who stabs his finger, for example, enters a mental state which leads to moaning and the withdrawal of the finger. Pain is nothing other than the state of the brain which results in this output of behavior. And this state can be described as a certain amount of data. So consciousness is the byproduct, the epiphenomenon, of a neural calculation, an algorithm. A basic principle of functionalism is substrate independence. If the mind is made up of algorithms and data structures, then it can run as software on every sufficiently complex hardware, whether it be composed of carbon or silicon, of neurons or transistors and circuits. And this is because it is always only algorithms and information which make up the mind. So nothing material, nothing biological, nothing corporeal. The progress of artificial intelligence has granted functionalism an enormous boost. The power of human intelligence doesn't seem to be bound to the brain, let alone to consciousness. Of course, no artificial system has the faintest idea what it calculates or does. As we can see, and it's obvious, the decisive feature of pain, feeling, or thought is lost in the functionalist conception, namely experience. John Searle's classic Chinese room argument still remains relevant. Even an artificial system that can translate Chinese perfectly or can find the matching answers to all questions in Chinese according to its program, still such a system does not understand a single word of Chinese. Meaning cannot be reduced to functional algorithms if there is no conscious subject who understands what these algorithms should mean. But the same applies to pain, to the taste of chocolate, or the scent of lavender. No qualitative experience as such can be derived from data and information, because consciousness is not a mindless traversal of states of data at all. It is at core self-awareness. It is for me that I feel pain, perceive, understand, or think. And this self-awareness is not based on reflection, nor is it composed of intentional contents of information. Rather, it already characterizes primary experience, such as my thoughtless dozing in the warm sun. It is a basal sense of self that forms the background to all of our experience, a feeling of being alive that springs from our body, and which manifests itself in well-being or indisposition, and specifically more specific in hunger, thirst, pain, or pleasure. But there is nothing to suggest that this vital sense of self can be reduced to digital algorithms. Let us take the example of pain. The unpleasurable quality, so the painful element of pain, cannot be expressed digitally in zeros or ones, and it cannot be expressed physically in negative charges. And this is because the difference between 0 and 1, or between plus and minus, only seemingly expresses a difference in value. In fact, this difference is only a convention. It does not imply anything negative, anything painful. All digital signs or physical states are only pure positivity, facticity, externality. And there is nothing to suggest that a system which runs them could experience something like pain. But this applies also for every other quality of experience. And it also applies for the striving, for being after something and being ahead of oneself, which characterizes all conscious life. Artificial systems only go through states. They are not ahead of themselves. They do not care for anything. Take the example of a cruise missile. It is equipped with a goal detecting program able to modify its course according to a forward mechanism that minimizes deviation from the goal. But of course, the missile does not seek or discover anything. Each correction serves only the internal set point regulation and happens purely momentarily, without referring in any way to a set goal. For this goal itself, the mechanism remains blind and deaf. In other words, the core of consciousness, which makes us feeling and wishing beings in the first place, cannot be grasped by information theory. It is inseparably bound to our corporeal sensing and therefore also to our biological existence. That which is comfortable or which is painful, that which is good or bad, cannot be expressed by an algorithm. Digital information carries no values. And whatever we take from the human brain in terms of data or information in order to copy or transfer it to an artificial system of processors and circuits, the outcome would ever be sheer externality. An android or cyborg programmed with such data would, in the best case, be an unfeeling zombie. Immortality is generally conceived a little different. The human person is not a copyable sum of data, not a digital program, but rather a living and experiencing being. Now, let me go to the second prerequisite of mind uploading, which is the identification of brain and person. In a typical formulation, all that makes up a person, such as their mind, their consciousness, emotions, memories, their identity, is physically saved in the structure and the processes of the brain. Now, this neuro-reductionist view, widespread today, is crystallized in the thought experiment of the brain in a vat. A brain removed from the body by a fictive neuroscientist, which would be kept alive in a nutrient solution and be fed appropriate information from a supercomputer such that it could produce the same experience, the same world, the same self as it allegedly does now, and we would not notice the difference. That would be our world. This is because our experience, so runs the argument, our experience is nothing other than a data structure within the brain itself, no matter where the brain is fed from. But the brain is not a closed system which only receives input and issues output. It is much rather continuously engaged in feedback interaction with the body and with the environment. And it is only through this constant interaction that conscious experience comes about. And this is the core tenet of the paradigm of embodied cognition. It regards consciousness and subjectivity as essentially embodied in the whole organism, not only embrained. And it regards it as situated or enacted through the ongoing sensory-motor interaction of organism and environment. And thus, the mind is not regarded as an inner model of the world produced inside the brain, but as a particular enactment of life, an enactment of the living organism as a whole. I have already mentioned the primary, still unreflected experience, the vital sense of self, that always remains in the background of everything we are thinking or doing. And this vital sense of self does not arise first in the cortex, but results from continuous, vital, regulatory processes which involve the whole organism, and which are integrated in the brainstem and higher brain centers. That is to be found in the research and results of affective neuroscience, in particular, Jaak Panksepp or Antonio Damasio. The maintenance of homeostasis, so the inner state and the viability of the organism, the maintenance of homeostasis is the primary function of consciousness as it manifests itself in desire, in hunger, in thirst, in pain, or in pleasure. And we can also express this in the following sentence: all experience is a form of life, or all Erleben, in German, experience, stems from Leben. Without life, there is no consciousness and no thought. A possible counter-argument would claim that vital processes need only be represented in the brain in order to be experienced, and then they wouldn't be constitutive for consciousness. However, the integration which underlies conscious experience is based on a continuous circular feedback between basal areas of the brain and the body. And these interactive circles do not permit the separation of representations from the represented, from the body. Damasio, for example, speaks of a looped circuit where the body communicates to the central nervous system and the latter responds to the body's messages. The signals are not separable from the organism states where they originate. The ensemble constitutes a dynamic bonded unit, and this unit enacts a functional fusion of bodily states and perceptual states, such that the dividing line between the two can no longer be drawn. The signals conveyed would not be about the state of the flesh, but literally extensions of the flesh. Now, the integration which corresponds to conscious experience is therefore not an image in the brain. It rather includes the organism itself. As conscious beings, we are corporal, bodily, embodied beings. In the same way, emotions are also bound to the constant interaction of brain and body. Moods and feelings always relate to the whole body, the brain, the autonomous nervous system, the heart, circulation, breathing, the muscles, facial expressions, gestures, and our position. Every emotional experience is inseparably bound to changes in the whole bodily landscape. And the same is true for all perceptions and actions, which are always inseparable sensory-motor loops between brain, organism, and environment. They are functional circuits involving our senses, limbs, and of course, objects and other people. The brain is capable of integrating all of the organismic functions, but it is, conversely, reliant and dependent upon them. It is not a command center which receives information and issues orders, but it is a resonance, a relational organ for all these loops. It is easy to see that the brain in a vat thought experiment fails here. Even a complex supercomputer could never simulate the homeostatic self-regulation of the whole organism, all of the interconnections of neural, humoral processes that involve the whole body. These processes are of a biological, a biochemical nature, and cannot be represented in digital information. Nor could a computer simulate all of the circular interactions between brain, the sensing and movable body, and the environment, those very things on which our experience and action in the world are based. Conscious experience presupposes corporeality, and thus biological processes in a living body. A disembodied brain is as much a functionalist fiction as mind uploading. Against such a cerebrocentrism, we may set the paradigm of embodiment. Consciousness is based on the continuous interaction between brain, body, and environment. It is not a localizable state at all. It is neither an internal state in the skull nor a data pattern in the brain. It is the overarching activity of a living being in its relationship with the environment, or in other words, it is humans who feel, perceive, think, and act, not brains. Let me once again turn to the basic idea of mind uploading. It is clearer now that behind the transhumanist visions there stands a concept of humanity as reductionist as it is dualistic. The fantasy of the fusion of mind and technology is an expression of an undercurrent of contempt for life and the living body. Freeing the mind from the material body is the solution that the transhumanists set before us. Ultimately, they are the secular epigones of the Neoplatonic and Gnostic teachings about the body as a grave or a dungeon of the soul. The Gnostics of late antiquity saw in the arbitrary creation of the world and of man by the demiurge, a sort of anti-god, a descent from primordial divine light. In terrestrial life, the pure spiritual soul of man, the pneuma, becomes connected to the dark and foreign matter of the body, thereby becoming impure. Of course, from the transhumanist perspective, the pure mind exists not as pneuma, but rather as a data structure, as information. As pure form, as substrate-independent structure, it should in principle be detachable from the body and transferable to another substrate. This functionalist thinking sharply separates the informational essence of the mind from its existence. However, this pure information is missing the decisive element of existence, namely concrete individuality. Information is freely convertible and arbitrarily transferable, but that is precisely its fatal deficiency. Information knows no individual perspective, no place from which the world could appear to a subject. This place of concrete individuation is nothing other than the living body. Is the living body, or the living being which forms an individual, self-reproducing and self-preserving unit, and which ultimately constitutes our conscious self-awareness. Transhumanists want, as Dostoevsky writes, to be born somehow from an idea, but the idealism of information is sterile. Mathematics or informatics does not produce humans. The mind does not exist in a pure form, but rather in the concrete being of individual existence. And this individualization requires a body. The mind is embodied, the mind is vital, and it cannot survive in the dead algorithms and circuits of a computer. Only as bodily beings do we feel and do we know what is good, what is not good, what is pleasure and what is pain, what is bad for us, what is good for us. And it is only the embodied being in the world that makes possible the freedom which we possess in the world. And this is because the body is the medium of our enactment of life, of all our feeling, thinking, wanting, and acting. Transhumanists see our freedom differently. In their radical, dualistic, neo-Gnostic view, the mind must be freed because we are only contingently trapped in mortal vehicles. Against this, we can posit the concept of embodiment. Embodiment means that bodies are not prisons and minds are not angels, but that both are indissolubly entangled in one another. The mind can never be removed from the body and transferred to a computer. Our conscious experience, just as our personal identity, is based on the body which we are. And this embodied, and therefore, of course, mortal individuation is the price we must pay in order to experience the possibilities and freedom of earthly existence. Let me sum up so far. Being a human of real flesh and blood seems more and more troublesome to us, as Dostoevsky said. The hostility towards the flesh today finds its expression in the functionalist cybernetic paradigm. Humans are information processing machines. Their consciousness and their personality exist as immaterial programs. Progress consists therefore in the updating of the deficient body by means of biotechnologies. The corporeality of our existence is one of the last resistors which opposes the digital progress. Our embodiment sets an unassailable border for all functionalist utopias. A being of flesh and blood is not representable in algorithms. And insofar as our conscious experience is embodied, it also cannot be simulated, copied, or transferred in the form of information. All experience is a form of life. Radical transhumanist utopias fail because of their complete misunderstanding of what life is. Now, mind uploading, digital immortality will remain forever an utopia. But the insight in the constitutive embodiment of existence also sheds light on less radical demands for enhancement and optimization. And here it can be shown that the idea of optimization meets inherent contradictions, shifting or displacing the proportions of human capacities which have been built up in the course of evolution, always comes at a high price, as I will try to show in my last part. And this is because the natural assets always represent meaningful compromises, which have resulted from the conflicting demands made by a complex creature like the human in a variable environment. Without going into too much detail, I would like to name 3 examples. A general enhancement of our powers of attention could be achieved by psychostimulants or, for example, transmagnetic brain stimulation. And on first view, it seems to be an indisputable advantage if we're dealing with speed of learning or professional efficiency. But attention is a precious gift, and many stimuli and possible objects compete for it. An excessive focusing of attention can lead to the exclusion of other objects which are also possibly useful. Patients taking Ritalin, for example, a psychostimulant used to treat attention deficit disorder, so those patients report that the increased fixation on the respective task renders everything else secondary. So their cognitive focusing increases, but the need for interpersonal relationships is decreased, as well as the interest in new experiences, spontaneity, creativity. So a general enhancement of human attention would come at the price of a loss of openness, flexibility, susceptibility for novelty. And thus, with this enhancement, we are faced with a typical conflict of optimization. But this conflict characterizes all other enhancements as well. Let's take the example to increase the powers of memory. The ability to memorize seems to be a win, and if we could enhance it, it seems to be a real improvement. But a person who memorizes everything can no longer forget anything. Forgetting relieves us from an overflow of details so that the significant memories can emerge. It is also only forgetting that allows us to neutralize the ever-powering effect of the past, an effect that would otherwise only ever grow in life. Only through this does the mind get the possibility of renewal, the ability to see the world with fresh eyes again and again. Individuals with hypermnesia, on the other hand, who are sometimes described in the literature, suffer the torment of no longer being able to forget anything. They are exposed to a constant crossfire of irrelevant memories, which they cannot suppress. So we can see that precisely the characteristic of our memory, that it establishes a viable balance between remembering and forgetting, is what makes us able to live on. And finally, let us look at the enhancement of mood. One might ask who would blame people if they want to boost their happiness by pharmacological or technical means. However, satisfaction and happiness are the reward which nature holds for us, the gain of effort, and usually this gain is about in proportion to the expense that we have invested. Mountaineers know the quite different experience of happiness depending on whether they have climbed the mountain themselves or whether they have only been carried up by a cable car. Now, if well-being and happiness would be kept on a constant high level for free, as it were, then the human striving for self-development and self-transcendence would weaken. Moreover, the experience of happiness itself would flatten, since it would come about undeservedly and not as a satisfying result of one's own effort. At the same time, frustration tolerance would diminish, because overcoming resistances and setbacks would no longer be trained to the same degree. And all this resembles basically the changes which may be observed in drug addicts in the long term. Let us finally think of Huxley's Brave New World, where the general intake of mood-enhancing drugs serves to provide a flat pleasure and sedation of the population. I think such an enhancement seems hardly desirable, even if it were a voluntary measure and not decreed by the state. Now, these examples should suffice to show that a remodeling of human nature is always accompanied by a high price, and we must pay it with the same coin that we have seemingly just won. This applies also to the ultimate transhumanist vision, namely immortality. The prospect the prospect that nothing is final any longer, that everything will be repeated forever, would rob humanity of all the treasure that it possesses in the unique, irreplaceable mortal life. In Jorge Luis Borges' story, The Immortal, the voyage to the immortal troglodytes leads the narrator to recognize that endless life means paralyzation by the eternal recurrence of the same. Everything among the mortals has the value of the irretrievable and the perilous. Among the immortals, on the other hand, every act and every thought is the echo of others that preceded it in the past, with no visible beginning, or the faithful presage of others that in the future will repeat it to a vertiginous degree. Nothing can happen only once. Nothing is precariously precarious. Precariously precious, it should read, sorry. Nothing is precariously precious. So we can see the experience of bliss, of intensity, of presence would flatten out, because the colors of life only shine on the dark background of death. Moreover, each prolongation of life, even more its immortality, would abolish the balance between the generations to the disadvantage of the descendants. In order to avoid overpopulation, the immortality of those living would be bought with the necessary prevention of new life. We would have to renounce the always beginning again, the always new beginning that starts with youth and birth. So in the defiance of death, humanity would always further age, solidifying in its current life forms, and would finally, in the repetition of the same, succumb to an all-overshadowing tiredness. I come to my conclusion. The vision of transhumanism seems to be friendly to us humans. But in the end, it is nothing more than a dystopia. Based on a neo-Gnostic dualism, transhumanism ignores the fundamentally antinomic structure of our existence, which, as an embodied and earthly existence, is necessarily characterized by polar terms. Transhumanists want to get rid of those polarities and antinomies. They think that there could be something like a pure mind, pure happiness, pure knowledge, or pure life. However, just as the mind may not be separated from the body, thus pleasure may not be divorced from pain, liberty not be divorced from restriction, or life from death. And there is a nice sentence, a nice passage in the foreword of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which I want to quote at last. The light dove, pigeon, the light dove in free flight cutting through the air, the resistance of which it feels, could get the idea that it could do even better in airless space. But even birds need the resistance of air for their free locomotion. Because movement is something bodily, and therefore it is subject to the polarity of embodied existence. Similarly, Kant goes on to argue, a philosopher who would only dwell in the realm of pure ideas would only arrive at fruitless thoughts and empty figments of his imagination. So mind needs resistance too. And therefore, we cannot keep one of the poles of existence and get rid of the other. Indeed, even shifting the balance between them may have serious consequences. Through biologically shifting our capacities towards one pole, we would lose the variation and adaptivity that is necessary for our life. And thus, the idea of enhancement and of optimization meets with inherent contradictions. The perfection of humanity can only be approached in a cultural and ethical sense. Transhumanism ignores the fundamentally antinomic structure of our existence, which as an embodied and earthly existence is characterized by polar terms. One of the founders of posthumanism, Robert Ettinger, formulated this program in its full radicalness in the last century. Thus, humanity itself is a disease of which we must now proceed to cure ourselves. To do this, it must first be shown that Homo sapiens is only a botched beginning. When he clearly sees himself as an error, he may not only be motivated to sculpt himself, but to make at least a few swift and confident strokes. But the abolition of man by man is an absurd undertaking. And this is because it is precisely the bodily affective conditions of our existence which first give us the primary values: birth, hunger, thirst, pain, desire, and death. Life is better than not life. Nutrition is better than hunger. Proximity is better than rejection. Love is better than hate. This should not be. That is good. We find the primary good because it is already inherent in our lives. We do not choose it at random. Without anchoring our wishes and values in human nature, we would lose the basic orientation of the good and the bad. Thereby, the concept of optimization would be rendered meaningless. As it were, there would no longer be an Archimedean point to which one could attach the posthuman world. To conclude, what we need today is a defense of the human being. It is necessary to defend our corporeality, our embodiment, as well as our bodily nature against the debasement, against the devaluation, against their overcoming. Our embodiment does not pretend to tell us what the good life is, how the Aristotelian succeeding life looks like, but it gives us better clues as to what this might be than any technically induced happiness. Let us therefore be satisfied with the conditio humana and its unavoidable imperfection. It may not be the best, but it is certainly not the worst thing that could have happened to us. Thank you very much for your attention. For some reason, I don't understand now. What did I?
Mattia?
Yeah, yes, I hear you now. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Fuchs, for this beautiful and so stimulating paper. And I think that everyone has question, and I would like to open the debate.
Allora, per quanto riguarda il dibattito, avete la possibilità di prenotarvi per porre le domande. Bisogna usare la funzione della manina che potete trovare in alto a destra e poi progressivamente quindi vi darò la possibilità di riattivare il microfono, quindi con ordine.
Grazie Mattia, grazie. Do la parola alla professoressa Annie Bitbol-Esperis. Bonsoir Annie, merci d'être ici. À vous pour la question.
Solo un attimo, quindi che... Allora... La professoressa può riattivare, può attivare l'audio.
Annie, il faudrait que tu actives l'audio, puisque il est bloqué. Il faut réactiver les volumes.
E se vuole può attivare anche la videocamera, professore.
E la videocamera della professoressa c'è, Mattia. Perfetto,
Okay.
Annie.
Sì, grazie Igor. Buonasera a tutti. I'm so pleased with this excellent talk. Thank you very much, Professor Fuchs, for this important talk and for your humanist views, and also for your wonderful invitation to read Descartes again, because, of course, Descartes provided us with an important analysis of the role of pain in the human nature, and it's very, very important, and it's always regularly forgotten. And I really think that we have, since we are in a Cartesian seminar, we really have to mention the importance of the discourse in the dioptrics dealing with sensations. That's that's of paramount importance in Descartes' works, and it is also very important for our thoughts now about the human condition, as well as is very important in Descartes' work is analysis of pain, especially in the sixth meditation, and at the end of the Principles of Philosophy, part 4. The end is of paramount importance for us. And so thank you so much. And we really have to cope with both things. The humanistic view provided wonderfully by Professor Fuchs, and we also have to read again Descartes, because Descartes gave us wonderful and very deep insights about what is de human natura. It's very, very important, and we have to remember that from the beginning of his study of man, from the writing of L'Homme to the description of the human body, contemporaneous with the passions of the soul, he investigates the nature of man in a very deep manner. Okay. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. I agree with the importance of reading Descartes anew. It's always good to not rely solely on hearsay, so to speak, with such an important and crucial author for modernity. The only reservation I would have is regarding his idea of pain as something really happening in the brain. He gives a lot of thought to the argument that the phantom pain in certain people who have been amputated, and other arguments should prove that the pain in my hand or in my foot is not actually in the foot, is not actually in the hand. but it is something that is projected onto my body. And thereby he tries to prove that our bodily spatial sense of self, so our embodiment, is only an illusion. And pain plays a crucial role here. That's at least my interpretation. So he tries to show that the pain is only seemingly in the periphery. Actually, it is in the brain or in the epiphysis. And that is, of course, in contrast to any phenomenological approach or concept of our embodiment, where I, as an embodied subject, inhabit the whole body, the whole organic body, and I'm not just enclosed in my brain. And therefore, we would have to revise this concept of the projection and also the pain projection, which is tricky. I have spent a lot of arguments on this in my book on the brain. But Descartes is a predecessor of many present-day neuroscientists who have the same opinion, that my body, as I experience it, is only a phantom body, which is created in the brain. And therefore, I would criticize Descartes for this, notwithstanding the crucial importance of his analysis, no question. Thank you.
Credo che ci sia una domanda del professor Agostini.
Se ci sono solo io, la faccio io. Magari gli altri potranno nel frattempo prenotarsi, sì. My question is in fact about the historical roots of transhumanism. Do you think that there is a particular reason at the origins of transhumanism? To put the things in other words, which are the historical reasons that bring to transhumanism?
Well, that's not quite easy to say, because transhumanism is first a development and a movement which arose very much in the context of Californian thinking, let me put it like this. So it's part of a very optimistic, technologically oriented community which developed first in the California of the 1970s and 80s. And it has obviously very much to do with the rise of digital technologies, which has obviously its center in Silicon Valley in California, and because of this optimism and the whole spirit that emerged from these breakthroughs, from this revolution of information technology, I think that it's no coincidence that transhumanist visions first developed in the context of these new information technologies. And even today, like a person like Ray Kurzweil, whom I mentioned shortly, and who is now present, leading developer, a development leader of Google technologies, Ray Kurzweil is in person, so to speak, the bridge between information technology and transhumanism. So that would be at least the local source and the local soil, so to speak, the fertile soil from which transhumanism sprang, took its beginning. On the other hand, one might also point to other developments which are due to an increasing secular society, and which tries to find new ways of prolonging life, of gaining at least a first step towards immortality. I think this the deeper roots of transhumanism lie in the in the loss of a metaphysical view of the human being as somehow embedded in a larger community of living beings, which have been the ancestors and which may be the descendants. So there's an increasing individualization of which we find in present culture, and the grandiose and narcissistic individual has great difficulties in accepting his finitude. So I think secularization, loss of a religious embedding of the individual in an overarching continuity of meaningful traditions, all this plays a major role for the rather technological approach to achieve, to overcome the limits of the body, so to speak.
Thank you. I think that just to say one thing more, I think that there is a sense in which Descartes is the origin too of this.
Okay.
Both for his idea of giving us a life as long as possible, quite near to immortality, he says, but also for his idea of body as a machine, yeah. which lets Geroux has an article, very important article on this, on to the cybernetic. So I think that even here there is a very not ambiguous, but I would say in Italian I would say ancipite position of Descartes. From the one side, it goes to the embodiment, but from the other side, in a sense, he opens to transhumanism in a very
absolutely
sense.
Absolutely.
Do you agree on this?
I would absolutely agree. It is well known that Descartes even hoped for a result of his own science and of his own research, of his own physics, namely that in future the human life could be extended, and he even mentions a number. He says to maybe 700 years. So that is what he envisaged as a possibility, and that is so he's one of the of the ancestors, so to speak, of this idea of longevity, of a prolongation of life, and he is also, of course, the well, the godfather, you could say, of the technization of the body. His own physiology laid out in De Homine, so about the human, is a completely mechanistic technology. A completely mechanistic physiology, which treats the body as completely completely devoid of any vitality, devoid of any inhabiting subject, just as the pure bodily machine, so to speak. And I think transhumanistic thoughts, transhumanist thinking is very much Cartesian in that respect. It is dualistic at its core. So I think Descartes can be regarded the godfather of transhumanism in a certain respect. I'm aware that he has other aspects and that he has other sides which are frequently neglected today. So I don't want to somehow demonize Descartes and make him into the founder of all dualistic machine technologies that we have today. But on the other hand, he plays a crucial role, no question.
Thank you very much for your answer. Ci sono altre domande?
No, credo che non ci sia nessun altro. No, non si è prenotato nessun altro.
Bene.
It's fine. It's fine.
I would like to thank you, Professor Fuchs, so much for your wonderful conference. And I really would like to have you in the next future in Lecce in presence.
Oh, that would be a pleasure. Absolutely.
We will be very delighted.
May I ask, where are you speaking from? You personally?
From Italy. From Lecce.
So
from Lecce. Yes.
Okay.
From Lecce.
Yeah, I thought that.
Yes.
So next time we should meet in Apulia.
In Lecce. Have you ever been here before?
Not in Lecce itself, but to Apulia I have been. Yes, to Lecce Monopoly and other states and other cities.
Lecce
yes.
is the best of the Puglia.
Lecce is the best. Okay.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay.
Yeah,
Professore, yes? Chiedo scusa, ma c'è una domanda da parte di Pasquale Marino.
Ok.
Quindi...
There is another question.
You're welcome.
Pasquale, prego.
E devo soltanto attivare. Ok. Quindi credo che possa procedere ad attivare il microfono. Ok. Sì, e anche la videocamera, se possibile. Ok, comunque credo che riusciamo a sentirti, Pasquale. Ah, ok, ora riusciamo anche a vedere.
Ok. Yes, it's a very simple question. I would ask you what role does the body play in cognitive activity according to your point of view?
In cognitive activity?
In the process of knowledge.
The process of knowledge. So you mean not an embodied way of knowing, but a kind of cognitive way of knowing things, of gaining knowledge.
Yes, if body plays a role in reference to the neurological circuit.
Yeah, well, that is not a simple question, certainly, but we would have to look at different areas where cognition and where cognition is dependent on the body in different ways. No question that cognition, in the sense of dealing with objects in the environment, perceiving and handling objects in the environment, is something that is dependent on sensory motor circuits. So our whole primary relation to the world and how we get familiar with things is through grasping, through dealing with objects, through moving towards objects and handling them. So our primary cognitive exploration of the world, so to speak, is only possible by means of our embodied interaction with the environment. And so there's no question on this level. But the interesting question is there a higher level of cognitive knowledge which may perhaps not be dependent on the body? And that is obviously what Descartes had in mind. So he said, well, if I'm thinking and not acting, if I'm just thinking, if I remain in the pure sphere of the mind, then the body is not necessary. It doesn't even play a role. And I think this is mistaken, because in all our cognitive operations, we always rely on the primary bodily experiences that are somehow abstracted and from which the cognitive operations are derived. This is very well shown by Piaget, for example. Piaget showed that all our higher operations, like distinguishing, like integrating, either or, all these logical operations are ultimately derived from our sensory motor actions by which we collect things or take things apart, or by which we count by taking the fingers and eat one after the other. So all our cognitive operations are ultimately derived from the embodied operations that are our primary, that provide us with a primary experience. So abstraction does not mean disembodiment. This can also be shown by language. Language is not just an abstract symbol system, but language is derived from speaking. And speaking, again, is something which has to do with the body. And if we use verbs, for example, we always have the motor meaning embodied in the verbs. So if I use the word taking, I cannot use it in an abstract sense, but always, even in my brain, when I speak or hear the word taking or to take, then there is something like a motor involvement already present in my brain and in my body. The same when I take the word lick or kick or prick. All these verbs, for example, have different areas in the motor cortex which they trigger, so to speak, although they sound quite similar, lick, pick, kick, but it's done by different organs by different limbs of the body, and therefore you can find that in the brain, while speaking these words, you have different motor areas that are triggered by them. So that is just an example to show that even such a seemingly abstract system, such as our language, is immediately connected to our body because it is derived from our bodily experiences originally. And it still carries its embodied meaning, even on an abstract level. I cannot develop this further on. It's just a few answers to your not simple but rather difficult question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that there is a question by François-Xavier De Peretti. Quindi prego Mattia di abilitare il microfono di François-Xavier De Peretti. Je t'en prie, François-Xavier, et bienvenue.
Professor Peretti can activate the microphone.
François-Xavier, il faut que tu actives le microphone.
Così va bene?
Perfetto, perfetto.
Grazie Igor. Professor, thank you very much for your very strong argumentation. My question is very, not very simple, but very short. What do you think about the Spinoza's claim that the mind is an idea of the body? Isn't it a very useful and relevant argument against transhumanism?
You mean the mind is an idea of the body?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I understood Spinoza to mean that mind and body are two aspects of actually one and the same substance, which ultimately is God itself. But anyway, that's Spinozism, as, for example, Spinoza's thought, as, for example, taken up by Antonio Damasio, is, of course, that there is not a dualistic sense of the mind versus another entity, the body, but that both are aspects, or both are appearances of one and the same substance and one of the same nature, so to speak. And in that sense, I think Spinozian thought is still very much is still very pertinent to an embodied approach, because an embodied approach would also argue, or would also claim, that for example, my lived body as I experience it is another aspect of the living body that may be observed from a third person point of view. So if you look at my body, if you explore it, if you look at my brain while I'm speaking, you will find a lot of physiological processes that are enabling my speaking. But on the other hand, you can also look at my body as an embodied being, as an animated body, so to speak. You're looking at me as a personal being, and then you are not looking at me from a third person point of view, but from a second person point of view, as an interacting interpersonal engagement. So these are two aspects of my body, and you could even add a third one, that is how I experience my body myself. So we have the lived body from the first person perspective, we have the lived body from the second person perspective, and we have the corporal or the physical body from the third person perspective, as for example an anatomist or a physiologist or a neuroscientist would look at it. But all these different bodies, all these aspects are of course only aspects of one and the same entity, which is the living being. So I don't think that I exist two times somehow, but it's only one living being that is me. But Spinoza could be taken up here, and we could say, well, there's an aspect which is the aspect of the subject, and there is another aspect which is the aspect of the body, of the physical body. And I think Spinoza comes much nearer to an embodied approach, embodied image of the human being than Descartes would come to it. I hope this
Yes, thank you.
Answers a bit of your question.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Vi sono altre questioni, Mattia? Mi pare di non vedere altre mani alzate, vero?
Mi sembra di non vederne, no, credo di no.
Bene. I want to thank again Professor Fuchs for your beautiful conference to be here with us tonight. And I hope to see you soon in Lecce, and we will stay in touch. Just a
word. It would be a pleasure, yes. Thank you very much again, also from my side. It was nice to speak to all of you, but of course it would have loved to meet you in person. Let's see how it turns out in the course of the year.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Solo una parola, vi aspettiamo giovedì prossimo per la conferenza del professor Sulpizio, sempre alle 6:30, sempre su Teams, su Di Capua. Quindi passiamo da questioni di filosofia contemporanea, ma comunque sempre in qualche modo tali da affondare le loro radici nella storia del pensiero cartesiano, passeremo invece proprio all'immediata posterità del pensiero cartesiano. Grazie ancora a tutti quanti presenti e al professor Fuchs. Buonasera a tutti. Good night.
Night.
Oh, grazie.
Grazie.